Mixed method studies can be rather like a Frankenstein's monster. If you remember your story of Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein used bits and pieces out of different people to create his own version of a person. Unfortunately, that got out of hand for him, and his creation was a monster. On the other hand, mixed methods can be absolutely fascinating in the hands of someone who is skillful with them, who understands why they're doing it. They have a rationale. There's a reason why these pieces are being done. A bad reason is let's just get all the data we can and just pull it all together and study every which way we can on this phenomenon. People seem to find sometimes that the more data they have, the happier they are. They feel like more is better. What happens, though, the monster part of that is when pieces of that conflict with one another, when it's hard to make sense of one piece against another. And so it is, unless you have taken specific coursework in mixed method work, it is usually in your best interest to minimize the amount of mixed method work you're doing. However, as a consumer of that, you have the ability, when you understand qualitative and quantitative, to also understand what's going on in good mixed method work. When you do it, it has both qualitative and quantitative data, but one will have priority usually over the other. One will lead and the other follows. And the sequence makes sense and it matches the reason. There's a reason behind, and you as the reader will know what that reason is, why they switch from one methodology to the other. Very often you will have some kind of a table or some type of a diagram showing what a mixed method study looks like within the methodology itself, but it's not necessary. When the qualitative piece is the largest piece of what's going on, when it's the lead and the quantitative follows, the purpose for that is that you are exploring something. You're trying to find out what's going on, and then you're going to use the quantitative piece to pick up and verify what you found in that exploration. So the qualitative piece is usually an open-ended interview to identify what's going on. And then the quantitative piece measures what's happening, whether that thing is standing up in terms of measures. I'll give you an example. Worked with someone who was doing working on Title I schools, and was working on the phenomenon of how much movement in and out of that district, those districts there are. That mobility really impacts their ability, that the school district's ability to serve those children well. So the study that was done by this person was, let me jump over here, was quantitative first, and it was explanatory. And so what she did is she took a survey and sent it out to all of the Title I districts about asking them what it was that they did to invite a student in, to send records back and forth, all of the things, contacts with the families and so on, for students that were highly mobile. The second piece of what she did then was to go out and do qualitative interviews with 6 building leaders who were exemplars, that when they reported back from their survey, they were doing some outstanding or different or unique types of things. And so, first of all, she reported on what the overall picture was from her survey, and then to get what could or should be done, she went out and did the qualitative piece. Now, she could have gone back over, let's look over that other side of exploratory. If she didn't know what she was looking precisely for, let's say if she went out first and found 10 buildings and went out and talked to them about what are the challenges of mobility and what are you doing about it, and used what those 10 people said to create the survey. That would have gotten her a different, that would have got, in that case, the reason that you did the qualitative is going to be your biggest piece, and the survey that came out of it just informs it, like what did what those 10 people say show up across the state? Is that valid? Is it useful? So either way, though, something like that makes sense, and it may be the route that you want to go, but you got to be able to do good qualitative and good quantitative work and be able to make sense of how one feeds the other. Because what you're going after is triangulation. Triangulation is saying, I'm going to look at it from different directions and see if the same thing is true. Now, all qualitative studies have triangulation in them. For example, my brother used triangulation in that he looked at the programs of the bands. He also talked to the directors of the bands, and then when he got it all together and figured out what went on, he sent that back to those directors and said, does that make sense? Is that the way you saw it? And got their feedback again. So that there was different ways of getting to that work. But when you're doing an equal rated qualitative quantitative study, that's where sometimes Frankenstein comes in, because you're collecting both of them at the same time. And it is possible that one's more dominant than the other, but this is the most, you can get crazy within it. This is the most difficult one designed to be able to do cleanly and not have one part of your design become in conflict with the other. So when you're evaluating these studies, what basically you look at it and say, how does it work? How does one work with the other? Are they both appropriate? Were they both necessary? And if it's sequential, how does the first step work with the second? And if they're at the same time, how do they triangulate and make sense of these things so that they don't conflict with one another? How are they, when they see discrepancies between the ways that they're handling between their qualitative and their quantitative, how do they explain that? How do they make sense of it? And if the second approach doesn't enhance the study, we shouldn't be doing it. It's not like more is better. Better is better. And so sometimes when you have enough, you stop. You don't go continue. And what you do is you say, for further study, qualitative work should be done, or for further study, quantitative work should be done, and not try to continue to do all the ways that a phenomenon can be studied, but just choose your piece of the pie and let that other piece be done by an expert in that type of work as well. So as you're reading these, you will find them less often, but they are becoming more popular in educational research, and they can help create a richness. If you have a basic quantitative study, you can get a piece of qualitative into it. It helps you understand that why. And if you're doing a qualitative study, if you have something that you can measure or count, it helps with the validity of it. So it is also possible to do one type or the other and just add a touch or one piece of that. And by the way, if you're doing program eval, it very likely has some flavors of a mixed method study, because in a program evaluation, you also are looking at quantitative and qualitative studies. It just doesn't have the same piece as a mixed method, because in program evaluation, the quantitative are answering certain standards or certain questions, and the qualitative are answering different questions for different purposes. And so you don't do that triangulation where you lay everything on top of one another to make sense of it. But they're all interesting, and they all have their place. But the bottom line is, what do you really want to know?